Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how to use big data to understand your market and improve business practices. I am Deborah Braquet, Sales and Marketing Manager for Solventure Life, and I will introduce you later on to our Managing Director, Professor Dr. Bram Desmet. But first, let's take a look at the agenda for today. So I will start with a short introduction on Solventure Life. And then I will continue with sharing how you can use big data for optimizing your business planning and sales forecasting process. Bram will share the methodology and will share a business case, and in the end we will leave some time for some questions. All right, so Solventure Life, who are we? At Solventure Life, we're specialized in advanced predictive analytics. So over the years, we have conducted a lot of research into how external information can impact our sales. And we've seen that by using external information, we not only improve forecast accuracy, but overall we gain a lot of insights in how our market looks like and what are the sales and demand drivers for our business. So we've developed a tool where we gather more than 2 million global indicators in our database. These indicators come from various sources like the Federal Reserve of Economic Data, which covers a lot of US data. We also have information from Eurostat, which is more European-based data. But we also have data from the National Bureau of Statistics of China and so on. So there's a lot of data to tap into. When we look at different types of industries, we see that not all industries are affected by the same type of external information. We see, for example, that chemical industries are more affected by macroeconomic factors, whilst when we look at FMCG or retail, we see that promotions, events, and calendar effects play a bigger role. So that's important to take into account when you're doing an analysis. And here's an overview of some of our references. So you see that we are represented across different types of industries. So we're in the chemical and process, discrete and high-tech, food and CPG. And it's definitely relevant for all these types of industries to see what the effect of external data can have on their sales and on their business planning and decision making. And another word on Solventure. So Solventure Life is part of the Solventure group, and Solventure has different business lines. So we have the Solventure S&OP business line, where we focus on sales and operations planning. So we do software implementation and software-based consultancy. And we focus there on 4 main pillars: people, process, tools, and analytics. So we look at S&OP process from a holistic point of view. Then, of course, we have the Solventure Life. As I explained to you, we're experienced in advanced forecasting analytics, where we look at leading indicators and global data to eventually improve your forecasting processes and business planning. And then there's the Solventure Academy. It's a training institute where we combine academic knowledge and operational knowledge, and we host several types of events. So we have accelerator days, days where we explain more on specific topics within the supply chain, so demand planning, inventory, supply, executive S&OP. But we also host boost camps, and these are more tailor-made to your business needs. So, for example, if you would be looking for more experience or expertise on demand planning, we can make a tailor-made training for your company. Below you can see the website, so if you would like more information, do not hesitate to visit them or get in touch with us. All right, so why use big data in understanding your market, and why should you be doing it? Let's take an example now. Let's say that the oil price is important for your business. And if you look at the chart here, you see that the oil price is going down in May. So this is a chart over the last 6 months, and you see that oil price is dropping in May. Now, if oil price is important for your business, what will be the effect on your business? Then will your sales drop? Will your sales go up? But also very important, when will this effect happen? Will it be today? Will it be tomorrow? Will it be in 3 months' time? Will it be in 6 months' time? Sometimes it's really hard to see when a certain external effect will have an impact on your business. And it's not only oil price, there's so much other external factors which are impacting your sales. So you would, for example, have weather. It's a warm winter. What will be the effect on your sales? Demographic information, employment rates. What will this do to my business? Also, raw material prices. What if the price of raw material goes up? How will we make decisions in our business to use that information? Social media, if a hype comes up, what will be the impact? Also producer prices. So there's so much information out there, and it's really hard to grasp all that information and to really define what's important for you. So yeah, it raises a lot of questions. What will be the effect of your business in the market when the oil price goes up? Should I be using or deploying my sales resources? If my oil price goes up and my market in Europe slows down, will I be putting more sales resources in Europe, or should I be just investing them in more North American regions? Should I be exceeding my marketing spend in Europe, or should I be more investing them in other regions? So it raises a lot of questions, and you feel that if you would have the information and if you would really be able to connect that information to your sales, you would be very much supported in making better decisions. But what we see at the moment is that a lot of companies use internal data, which could be past sales data, budget forecasting, financial forecasts, and there's also a big role for politics and trends in that process of decision making. But what if you would be starting to use external information? How could that help you in making better decisions and maybe let data speak instead of politics? What we see, of course, it's an exhausting process to find the relevant indicators for your business. It takes time, it takes money, and it definitely is not easy to grasp and to go through all that amount of data out there. So how can we improve that process, and how can we better tackle the external information out there and see what is relevant for your business? So let's get some experts in the room. I will now give the word to our Managing Director, Professor Dr. Bram Desmet, who will be sharing his vision here.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, let me walk to the process we use at existing clients. And in the next step, I will show an example or a case on which we have recently worked. So first of all, process steps. So what are the steps we go through with customers? Is determine aggregation levels. I will come back to that. Understand the business case. So in the business environment, which type of environment are you in? That should help us to find and understand leading indicators. We build a forecast model which we validate based on your historical data, or which we run in parallel to your existing forecasting process to make sure that the selected indicators do indeed prove themselves, let's say in a kind of a real-life pilot. Aggregation levels. That's the first important discussion. Let's start here on the left. I think every company has a typical product hierarchy, where if you go really down to the detail, you end up with individual SKUs. And certainly a leading indicator analysis, you will not run it on an SKU level. Why? Because on the SKU level, there's too much variance. There will be too much influence of the ordering behavior of individual customers. So we don't attempt to use leading indicators on the SKU level, unless you would only have 5 or 6 SKUs. Neither do we typically look at the highest level of aggregation, right? Because if you look at your assets, maybe it's not just enough to know how many bikes you will sell, but you want to know which different types of bike, what will be their use. So you want to go a bit lower into the product hierarchy. And at the highest level of aggregation, it could be that you only get correlations with very generic indicators, like, okay, if I look at the highest level of aggregation, I have a correlation with something like, I don't know, GDP growth. If I go to lower levels of aggregation, I might hope to find more relevant indicators. If part of my business would be depending on the automotive, and then maybe I try to find indicators with the automotive. If part of my business is linked to, let's say, furniture or to footwear, then probably I want to find indicators which are more linked to consumer confidence, so consumer type of indexes. And so one of the challenges is really at which level of aggregation do we get most useful information, and can we, let's say, improve the forecast the most. That's really, let's say, the vertical product hierarchy type of aggregation. A second question is certainly regional. So I can try to make a global forecast, and if I make a global forecast, again, I might have a correlation only with very generic indicators, like what's the global GDP growth for the next months or for the next years. But most probably, you want to be more specific, and you say, okay, how is my business in North America going to evolve? What's Europe going to do? What are we going to do in Asia? And at least you want to go to a regional level, and you even might want to go to sub-regions. If you're in Europe, you might wonder on how the south of Europe will evolve compared to the north of Europe. If you would be in construction business, we all know that over the last 5 years, construction in the southern part of Europe was more difficult compared to, let's say, Western Europe and Northern Europe. The same for Asia. Also there, we see a lot of companies have a special interest in China and then other parts of Asia. So also here you have a discussion on, on the one hand, you want to have enough detail to be able to make meaningful decisions. But the more in detail you go, the more variance there will be in the sales pattern, and the more difficult it will be to still find meaningful and relevant indicators. So we have, you could say, product hierarchy aggregation question. We have a regional aggregation question. Another aggregation question is, what's my time bucket? Am I trying to make a forecast on a tactical horizon, being in monthly periods, let's say for the next 6 to 12 months? Am I trying to make a strategic forecast where instead of monthly periods, I might use quarters or even years, and the horizon might then be 2 to 5 years out? Or am I really looking for short-term forecasting, where I say I'm looking at the next couple of days, and I'm looking on how, for instance, weather information is going to influence my decisions over the next few days. The bulk of the work we have done is on the tactical horizon. So also the examples you will see come from here. The techniques that we deploy can also be applied on a strategic level or on a more short-term level. And coming back to the previous slide, so over here we typically try to run analysis on different levels of detail. So you could say, well, I have my product hierarchy 2, and we'll run this combination of the region. So I have product hierarchy 2, and let's say I have 5 possible values. I run that across 5 regions, then I would have 25 forecasts. And we can run that type of analysis on a lower level of detail. We can run it on a more aggregated level of detail, and then see what gives the best result and how potentially the indicators are different on different levels of aggregation. Here, if you want to make a strategic forecast, as we will see later, we are working with leading indicators. So we don't have indicators which are leading 5 to 10 years out. So don't expect us to say, well, your actual business depends on something which happened 5 or 10 years ago. That's very difficult to find. What we can find here in the tactical window is like, if we know what is influencing your business, let's say on the 3 to 18 month horizon, and in that range we certainly find indicators which are leading that far. You also know which type of information to take into account when you make a strategic forecast. So if I know, like, part of my business really depends on automotive, so it depends on the number of cars that are being sold. Well, I don't know how much cars are going to be sold, let's say next year, but I'm typically in a position I can buy forecasts for that. So instead of using actual historical data, I can then use that forecast information to make a strategic forecast, let us say the coming at least 2 to 5 years. And for which forecast do I need to look? Well, I know that from my tactical analysis, which we will explain in more detail in the rest of this webinar. So how do we approach it? Once we have chosen a certain aggregation level, and once we have chosen a certain time bucket, so we will work in months for the rest of this presentation. Well, if you look at your historical sales pattern, you will typically see a lot of variance. And the first step really is to account for that variance and take that off. And there's typically 2 types of variance. First of all, there is seasonality. You may know that August is going to be a bad month because you are closed and most of your customers are closed. You might also know that February is a month with less sales because typically there's less working days. Well, this is normal variance, which you know is going to recur every year. And we don't want to explain that type of variability using a leading indicator. We will just remove that before we do the matching with the leading indicators. A second element is events. And in our next webinar next month, we will talk in more detail on how to deal with events in more details. But what could be an event? Well, if you are an FMCG player, a promotion can be an event, and a lot of the variability in the demand might be defined by the promotions. If I'm in business to business, in chemicals or in automotive, an event could be a change in prices. If I increased my price or if I decrease my price, that gives a certain peak in the demand. An event could also be an import tariff. If dear Donald Trump is changing import tariffs for certain products, that will change the market, and that can have, let us say, an effect before that event. So if the import tariffs are announced, you will typically see effect of that in the months before, and you will also see an effect after the introduction of that import tariff. Another event which we have recently encountered is the takeover. So a company has taken over another company. In theory, you could clean out that data, but we have also more treated it like an event. Another one which we have recently dealt with is that for one of the customers, they see that in the market, one of their competitors is going bankrupt. So that's also an event in the market, because it means that because of that event, you will see an increase in your sales. And if you want to model what is the impact of that event, you really need to model it as an event and treat it separately. So the first step for us is really, if you look at that variable demand pattern here, the dark blue, we take off the seasonality, we take off events, and that's really a discussion we have together with our customers. Because what we want to do is we want to reveal what is the underlying trend, what is the underlying cycle. Underlying, is my sales going up? Is it going down? Is it picking back up? And in which direction is it going? So that's the first step, it's revealing the underlying cycle. If you then look at how traditional forecasting techniques work, is that they basically extrapolate a recent sales history. And as long as my trend is constant, so if I'm over here, as I indicate with my pointer, if my sales is increasing each month with 5%, well, then it's very easy to predict what's going to happen the next few months. It will increase with 5%. The difficulty occurs here at what we call the inflection points. So we see that in some industries, at some point in time, we are hit by uncertainty and we say, okay, China seems to be cooling off. Yeah, but what does it mean China seems to be cooling off? Are we going to continue for the next quarter with a 10% growth? Is growth going to be flat? Or will we see a drop back with minus 10%? Because the difference between the plus 10% and the minus 10%, that's a difference of 20%. And if you need to import goods into China or vice versa, well, you typically need to know that at least 3 months up front. So when we are around inflection points, we see that first of all, there is uncertainty. We also see that traditional techniques fail because the traditional technique will just base itself on recent history and extrapolate a plus 10% growth. And okay, at that point we say, well, we don't trust a statistical forecast, so we will rely on the experts. That's why we have a validation by the salespeople. That's why we have what we call a collaborative forecasting process. We will ask sales, or we will ask product managers or regional sales managers to give their opinion on what's going to happen. But if these people are honest, well, it might be that they say, well, I don't know either, right? Because I'm also caught with the uncertainty what's going to happen. Plus 10%, 0%, or a drop back of 10%. And what we want to do is see if we can find leading indicators which help us to better turn the corners, which on the one hand, when the sales is increasing, do predict an increase in the sales, but also have a better predictive power that if at some point in time we are uncertain whether sales is going to continue with 10%, is going to be flat, or is going to drop with 10%, that we can use those leading indicators to predict which direction the market is going. So that's what we show here. So we are looking for indicators which help us in a certain sense to better turn the corners, which tell us, well, this is the moment where China will really start declining, and which also help us at some point in time to say, well, it's going to bottom out and we will see the kind of a recovery and the demand picking back up. So that's really our ultimate goal of using leading indicators. Of course, we are looking for indicators which are leading, which means I'm looking for an indicator which tells me at least a couple of months ahead, for instance 9 months ahead, and in the example we will show later on, we have indicators which have a 12-month lead, so which means 12 months ahead I see if the indicator goes up, I know that 12 months later my sales is going up. And the bigger the lead, of course, the better for me, because the further ahead I can improve my forecast, and the better I am prepared to make better decisions. So that's really the goal of finding the leading indicators. We will show an example of that. Once we have found that leading indicator, we will use that indicator to make a forecast, let's say, going forward. And of course, the forecast we make is, you could say, a trend forecast, to which we need to add back the seasonality. So I made a trend forecast. I know in August I will sell less because every year I close and my customers are closing down. Well, then I will have to add that seasonality back to the forecast of the trend. And I might also add events like, if I know that next quarter there will be a price increase or decrease, or next quarter there will be certain promotions, or I will be hit by certain import tariffs, I need to add these events to correctly model my demand. So that is really the procedure we go through. And how do we typically tackle it? Well, we start with looking for the right indicators. How do we do that? We do a mind mapping session together with you to better understand what do you expect are the drivers of the demand. Typically we see in the analysis that some of the expected indicators are confirmed, but some of the things which are expected are not really confirmed by statistics. So on the one hand, the analysis helps you to get a vendor understanding and separate the fat from the fact. So what did we think was having an influence and what are the things that are really confirmed to have an influence. And we also do what we call here a brute force statistics analysis, meaning that we just run your data through the full database of leading indicators, which is now exceeding 2 million. And yeah, we see which other type of relationships can we come up with, which potentially you were not aware of, but if we review them, it could make business sense. And just to give one example, for one of the customers, we run an analysis on North American data, and we came up with an indicator which was linked to Asia, countries in Asia. And in the beginning it was counterintuitive, because they said, well, how is economic data from Asia going to link into US sales? But it was clear that for the specific product group, a lot of the product was used in the semiconductor industry, which is of course concentrated in Asia. So this was a kind of a pattern which they were not aware of, and which we were able to reveal through this type of brute force statistics. And once, let us say, we have identified relevant indicators, what we can do is benchmark, and we can just say, well, let's take the last 6 months as an example and see how the forecasting model would compare towards the actual sales over that 6-month historical period. We can also run a couple of months in parallel your existing forecasting process compared to the forecasts delivered by the leading indicators. And once we have enough confidence in the model, then we will start using it operationally. And our engine will then typically deliver a forecast either to you towards your existing forecasting system, or let's say we as Solventure are a distributor of the Arqiva software, so we can also couple that back to the Arqiva demand planning module to make sure that you have that leading indicator forecast available in your forecasting process. So that's our approach. Let's look at an example. The example is taken from a recent analysis we did. It's a company which is a second-tier supplier to the automotive. So in fact, we will have to say a little bit more. Of course, we cannot disclose too much information, but it's a company which is delivering to the tire industry. And the tire industry, of course, is delivering into the automotive, both OEM and aftermarket, or let's say replacement. And we were looking here specifically at Chinese operations, which also shows that we have the capability to run analysis in China. And okay, by doing the analysis, this type of indicators came up. First of all, we saw a relationship with the global price of rubber. And you see that the relationship is negative, which means that, okay, if the price of rubber is going up, then our client here will sell less. If the price of rubber is going down, then our customers will be selling more. Well, if you are delivering into the tire industry, that could still be logical. But what was striking here was the lag of 12 months. Because a lag of 12 months is serious. That would really mean that the rubber price today tells me something about what my sales is going to do 12 months out. And 12 months is really a long period. So when you first see this type of results, you ask yourself questions like one of the questions we asked internally, like, could this be due to seasonality? Because maybe there's just a seasonal pattern in the indicator, and if the price of rubber has a certain effect, I don't know, in December, because there's more or less sales of rubber in December, and there is a certain effect in our sales. Well, maybe we are just matching the seasonality instead of really matching, let's say, some kind of economic link. That's not the case, because we have shown that we can easily deseasonalize data. So also when deseasonalizing the sales data, deseasonalizing the indicators, we still saw that relationship there, and I will come back to it. A second link here was with the crude oil price. It's again a negative relationship, which means if the oil price is going up, we will sell less. If the oil price is going down, we will sell more. And it's again with the lag 12. And you also see the relative importance. So rubber price seems to be more important compared to the oil price. That's kind of a second indicator. And we also included 2 internal company indicators. Well, in fact, we did not include them. We included them in the set of indicators. And then the model has selected these indicators as relevant. We cannot disclose which type of indicators these are, but it also shows the capability and the type of discussion we have with companies that on the one hand you have to say open and freely available data. Companies do have internal data. They also buy data. Well, you can also use this type of data and include it in the analysis. And if you can see what is the added value of the data you bought, you are also more aware of the value and the price you are willing to pay for that type of information. Let's come back to that rubber price. So we investigated in more detail, like rubber price, how can that link to our sales with a lag of 12 months. That was something we investigated in more detail. So we started looking at the rubber price. First half of 2011 here you see a big peak, and apparently that was due to storms in Southeast Asia, which had an influence on the supply of rubber, and because of the problem in the supply, the price, as you can see here, really went up from around 160 to around 280. So that's almost double. And the question is then, of course, well, first of all, we see here now that the rubber price is decreasing. The rubber price is increasing here again over the last few months. So certainly our customer here was questioning itself, like, okay, if my sales would be negatively correlated with the rubber price, well, if the rubber price is now going up, does that mean that over the coming months or the coming year, it will negatively impact my sales? That's really the question we're after, right? And if we do have indeed a lead of 12 months, it means that, okay, the rubber price is increasing now, let's say January 2017. Well, if the rubber price is increasing now, it would mean that my sales is going down in January 2018. So if this really works, I know 1 year in advance where my sales is going. So if that would be the case, it has tremendous value, but we still distrust the 12-month lag. That's maybe in essence what we are thinking of. And well, this is something we discovered, is that, okay, we already told that the company is a supplier to the tire industry. If you look at the price of tires, and you can easily find indexes on that. So this is the index for China. You see here the evolution of the price of tires. So what you see, remember that we had a peak in the rubber price in January 2011. You indeed see that it really takes a longer period, almost 1 year, before we really see the peak in the price of the tires. And this is another illustration of the same. So on the top here you see the price of the rubber, and at the bottom here you see the price of the tires. And you really see here that the peak in the rubber price is followed by a peak in the price of tires around 1 year later. That would mean that if you try to reason like what's the economic relevance, it kind of would mean that if you look at the rubber, probably which is sitting at the distributors of tires, the inventory of tires which the tire manufacturers have themselves, and maybe even inventory of rubber they have available at the same at their site. All of these inventories create a huge lag of around 1 year. That's kind of the assumption which is underlying this. And again, the reason why we were so interested is because we see here that the rubber price is going up. But if the rubber price is going up now, the question remains, like, does that mean that the price of tires will go up within 1 year from now? And if the price of tires is going up within 1 year from now, and I'm delivering to the tire industry, does that mean that my sales will go down as a result? That was really kind of the causal relationship we have been investigating here. Yeah? In the next slides, we will show some sales results and a further analysis. We have the data as from 2013, so in the sales data we show, and which has been anonymized, we will only look at 2013 and next period, so you will not recognize these peaks here to the left. You will more see a gradual decrease, for instance, in the price of tires or of the rubber. And okay, this is the black line is the sales result. You do see some seasonality. Yeah, like if you see peaks over here, I already told this is Chinese sales, so you have the effect of Chinese New Year. Well, probably you don't want to forecast Chinese New Year using an indicator. No, you know this is an event which is recurring every year. It's a shifting event, so it's not very easy to model it using traditional forecasting techniques. It's more easy to model it using external data, but we really treat this as an event. And the red line is the deseasonalized and the smoothed sales, where we are looking for trends. So if you look at the trend, you could say, well, it's increasing, it's decreasing a little bit, it's kind of stable here, and here we see that the sales is increasing. And again, coming back, looking forward, and we will not show the forecast because that's potentially sensitive. Yeah, looking forward, the real question remains, like if rubber prices are increasing, could that negatively affect our sales? So yeah, we work with indicators, leading indicators, and on the one hand we see here, remember that the rubber price was the first indicator, and there was a negative correlation, meaning that if the rubber price is going down, it should typically support our sales. Well, if you would make a forecast only taking into account the rubber price, you get the green line. What you basically see here, well, as the rubber price is going down, we see that our sales is increasing, right? So the decrease in the rubber price is kind of supporting our sales and our sales growth. That's what we see. But we also clearly see that that is not the full or the complete picture. I see a big jump here in my sales. Yeah? This is for specific product categories. We will not disclose which ones, but we see a surge here. Well, the surge here is not explained by, let's say, the decrease in the rubber price. And another question again would also be like, yeah, but I see my sales is increasing here. Yeah, what is explaining that? Because at the same time, I'm concerned that in the future, as the rubber price is increasing, that could potentially negatively impact my sales. So this is really the type of struggles we have, right? So next indicator we add is the oil price. If we look at the oil price, what do we see? Well, oil prices have been relatively stable or relatively flat here. If you look at 2015, beginning 2015, there seems to be a kind of a slight increase. It seems that it has been slightly increasing before we saw an important drop. And also remember that the oil price had an inverse relationship, right? So if the oil price is going down, it's typically good for our sales. We will sell more to the tire industry. And a big difference you see is that, well, the jump you see over here is really better supported by adding that oil price. So you could say, well, probably the long-term trend in my sales and the long-term growth in my sales was driven, say, more by the rubber price and the effect the rubber price has on the tire industry. But if I look at the shorter term effect here, the fact that my sales is here increasing more fastly on the more recent history, that seems to be more driven by the oil price. And in general, yeah, it's the case that most probably there's more than one driver which has an influence on your demand, right? If it would only be that simple, you wouldn't need an advanced forecasting model, and you probably even wouldn't need a company to help you with that. In practice, there is multiple drivers. Yeah? Already remember that there's a lot of variability which is driven by seasonality, by events, by promotion. So you need to be able to take that off. And then the underlying trends in your sales probably has multiple drivers or multiple causes, and you will need to combine multiple drivers or multiple causes to come to a good model. And without going into too much detail, by adding extra indicators, so we had two company indicators which we added, a first one and a second one. So this is really the result where we have added the different indicators. So that's the model with the 4 indicators. And what you see is by using 4 indicators, at least already on the underlying trend, on what is the underlying driver, where is your sales heading towards, we get a very good explanation which we can then extrapolate towards the future. And if you extrapolate towards the future, what you do is you take the underlying trend and then you add again the seasonality and any events or promos you know that will happen into the future. This is just an example of if you go through this type of procedure, the fitted value is like over the history, what would have been the forecast, and if you look at the black line, what would have been the or what was the actual sales. We all know that there's only one truth in forecasting. The forecast will always be wrong, so also this forecast is not perfect. The red line is not exactly matching the black line. So what is important, and that's also part of our procedure, is that we look at the errors. Like if you say, well, this was the forecast. So we had a forecast here mid-2015 at a certain level, and the sales was significantly lower. So by looking at the errors and looking at the deviations, we can reveal potential extra drivers, right? And typically we go through a couple iterations where step by step we try to make the model more intelligent. So we gradually add intelligence in the model up to a point where we say, well, we now have explained sufficient variance to be able to plan our business, let's say, in a good way. That's how we approach it. So in general, using a model which includes multiple leading indicators, it will help you solve different types of questions. And in general, we see that there's a lot of assumptions in companies on what is driving the market, but we don't see a lot of quantitative analysis which is separating the fat from the fact. And in general, for instance, I see that a lot of companies assume there is a relationship with the oil price. But if you look at the oil price, there's really a difference before and after the situation where shale gas started to be developed on a more massive scale in the US, right? So yeah, maybe historically your business was heavily dependent on the oil price, but as the supply of oil, let us say, was more widely available, some of the historical links might have been broken, and you might have comparable examples in your business. So using statistics to analyze that and to deepen your understanding on what is really the driving the market and what is statistically relevant, these are certainly questions which already add a huge value to your company processes. If you know that, and if from that perspective you have a better understanding on where your market is going, yeah, how will that affect your sales decisions? Like if I know that, I don't know, some sub-markets, and it could be some sub-segments, if I say automotive will be going down but construction will be going up, or if I know that Northern Europe will be picking up and Southern Europe will be in troubles, how will I redeploy sales resources? So how will I make different decisions as a sales director or as a president of a business unit to optimize, let's say, the use of my resources? Do I want to accelerate spending, or do I want to sustain market share through difficult times by doing some marketing efforts? So how will I use that information, let's say more from a marketing and sales perspective. And next to that, certainly also, if I know where volumes are going, how will that affect my buying decisions? How will that affect my production decisions? Will I produce more locally in the US or in Europe, or will I import from China or vice versa? So all these type of questions can typically be more accurately answered if you have a better insight coming from this type of multivariate leading indicator model. And that's what we have prepared. On the one hand, explaining the approach, at the second hand, showing a real-life example. And now we will open up for questions, and I will hand the word back to Deborah.
All right, I see already one question coming up here. Bram, how about coincident and lagging indicators? Do you use them in addition to the leading indicators?
Good questions, typically difficult questions. Let's start with the coincident indicators. A good example is weather information. If you are selling air conditioning to consumers, you know that consumers will order more air conditioning when it's hot. Typically there's not really a leading effect. Or if you're selling soft drinks, you know that when the weather is hot, you will sell more soft drinks compared to when it's cold. So that's an example of a coincidence. It's not leading. And for weather, we even have the problem or the issue that we might have a weather forecast for the next 5 days or for the next 10 days or 14 days, but we certainly don't have a weather forecast which is reliable for the next 3 to 12 months. Still, being able to define that relationship is crucial, and it's crucial for two reasons. One, if you don't know what is the influence of weather on your data, well, it's impossible to detect what is the influence of more macroeconomic factors like GDP growth, consumer confidence, GDP per capita, whatever you would have. So if you cannot remove the variance which is caused by the weather, you will be in the dark on what other factors are influencing your sales. So that's already a first important reason. A second important reason is that it's not because I can't predict what the weather is going to be like 3 months out. So will we have a hot summer? Will we have a cool summer? I don't know. But I can easily run scenarios. So if you look at weather data, you easily have 50 years of history. If you look at the 50 years of history, it's quite easy to define what is a hot summer and what is a cold summer. And what's the probability to have a hot summer, and what's the probability to have a cold summer, or what's the probability to have an average summer. So what we do is, based on that historical weather information, we compile scenarios and we say, okay, we can't predict whether it's going to be a hot summer or a cold summer, but we know what are the probabilities, and we can also tell you what will be the influence on your sales. So we can give you a forecast based on the average weather pattern, let's say for the coming 6 months, and then we can also show you the two extremes, like what will your sales be on the one hand when you get into very cold weather, and what will your sales be when you get into very hot weather. And that's an example of what in any case you can do even with an indicator which is coincident. Another thing which you can do is, well, if for instance I know that my sales is depending on automotive, but the lead is only 3 months. So if automotive is going down now, I know that my sales will be going down in 3 months' time. Or automotive is going up now, so then I will have an impact within 3 months. Well, that gives me information for the next 3 months, but it doesn't give me information for 6 months or 9 months or 12 months out. But if you know that that's the type of information which helps you, well, it's quite easy to find forecasts of where the automotive industry is going. So most probably you are already buying that type of forecasts from private data providers. So either you have the forecast and you can link it to your forecast, meaning that for the next 3 months it's really based on what have been the actual results of the automotive industry, and as of month 4 it's more based on what's the forecast on where the automotive industry will be going. So either you have the forecast, and if you don't have it, you know which type of forecasts to look for. You can buy it and you can include it in the forecast. So that's maybe a long story, but it's a very interesting question, and at the same time it's also a question which opens extra perspectives and let's say shows new ways on how to treat forecasting, including scenarios, and also basing your forecast on market forecasts, but again in a quantitative way.
Okay, thanks. Maybe time for one more question. Typically, overfitting history to a forecast model could result into bad forecasts for the future. What were the results for your model in 2017?
Yes, first of all, I acknowledge the challenge to deal with overfitting. There is a way to deal with that. There's statistical methods which penalize the inclusion of too many factors, because if I just introduce a new variable for every extra month, I will come up with a perfect fit of my history, but it will have no value when predicting the future. So it's clearly one of the challenges we are working on by using advanced regression models. That's in the end what is in the background. A second thing which we do is, well, we don't just base our forecast model on historical fit. What we do is we do a cross validation. So we take 6 months out, or we take 1 year out of your historical data, and we say, okay, we're trying to forecast that 6 months reference period, or we're trying to forecast that 12 months reference period, and we will look which type of indicators give a better result over that historical period. So that helps you to analyze, well, which are the indicators which really prove themselves in real life. And these are the indicators which we then really use in a cross-validation, where we say, let's just run in parallel over a couple of months. And for some of the results are spectacular. What we see in general is that these models are much more accurate than existing forecasting models or bottom-up manual forecasting. Certainly if you look at the midterm horizon, so if you look month 4, 5, 6 up to 9, 12, these models very easily outperform, let us say, existing models and existing forecasts in companies. When you look at the shorter term horizon, in general we see that it's more comparable. There we also see that when it really comes to the short term, there is more incentive for salespeople to validate the forecast, because, for instance, it also goes into the financial forecast. So the information is a bit more accurate. But what we are still, or how we are still evolving there, is to improve the forecast modeling. And so, okay, if it's about next month or about the next 2 months, then we will use different indicators. So in some of the real-life pilots we are doing now, we are changing the indicators and also using shorter-term indicators. And that really, the first indication there is that it will also help us to improve the short-term forecast. And when I say significant improvements, it's not, in the relative terms, it's not a 5% change in the forecast error. No, it's really 30%, 40%, 50%, so like half of the forecast error. That's really the type of changes we are looking at.
All right, I think it's almost 2:30. We should be closing the webinar. Thank you everyone for listening along. We have a next webinar coming up in June, 7th of June, where we are tackling the events part of how to deal with events in your data and how to better take that into account. So feel free to join. Would be great to see you all there as well. And the questions that were unanswered today, we will send out a document where we will answer all your questions. Okay, thank you, and see you next time. Bye.